Hello.
Hi, hi.
Hi. Thank.
Sorry about this.
No worries at all. Thank you so much for being here. So excited to have you.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, right, right. This is my first time, so
No, mine too. Don't worry at all. I'm so excited that we finally had this figured out. And now we can get
my
going.
apologies to everyone.
No
My
worries.
apologies to everyone.
No worries. I'm so excited. Everybody's
Yeah,
sending messages about how excited they are. Okay, so let's get started because I don't want to, hold you for
okay.
way too long. I want to give you a little introduction, guys, for folks that are new to him or even like that know him but want to know a little bit more. Mr. N. Kalyan Raman started life as a literary translator in the early 1990s and published his first work, The Colors of Evil, a collection of Tamil short stories by Ashokamitran in 1998. 12 more works of fiction by eminent contemporary Tamil writers have followed, including Manasarovar in 2010, Farewell Mahatma in 2014, The Goat Thief in 2017, and Heat in 2019. His translations of contemporary Tamil poetry has been included in anthologies of Dalit and feminist writing and published in literary journals in India and abroad, such as Poetry International, Circumference, Indian Literature, Caravan, and The Little Magazine, among others. His works have been shortlisted for several literary prizes in India, including the JCB Prize, Crossword, Hindu, and Attagalata. The Story of a Goat, his translation of Perumal Murugan's Poonachi, has been long listed for National Book Awards 2020 for translated literature. He was the recipient of the Pudhumaipithan Award in 2018 for his contribution to Tamil literature. He lives and works in Chennai. Thank you so much for being here, Mr. Kalyan Raman. I think the internet is a little bit slow, so let's give him just a second. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I
Okay,
can hear you.
perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here. I am so excited. Tell me a little bit about where you are and how you are, and what the COVID year has been like for you to set a little scene.
Well, I'm in Chennai at my home, which is on the outskirts of Chennai, near the beach, and I'm at home really, and yeah, these are dull days really.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, we're trying
just
to make it
coping with.
exciting. I'm still very excited to have you here. Tell me, let's just dive into it then. Tell me a little bit about sort of your love for translation, how it all began, and sort of walk me through some of the first few instances where you were like, you know what, this could be a career path for me.
Um, I don't know if it's a career path at all because I have had a regular day job for most of my
Okay.
life until I retired. So it was always something I did on the side. And then, of
Mm,
course, once I retired, once I got out of the roller coaster, I yeah, I was able to focus more on translations. Uh, why did I get into translations? How did I get into translations? It it really mm, it has to do with the way I grew up. I grew up in Madras. I went to school in Madras, and this was in the 60s, uh, and so the mother tongue education was pretty strong. And so I had a good grounding in school itself in Tamil literature, and I developed a deep love of Tamil.
mm,
And I was also inclined to be a reader, and like many of us,
yeah.
you develop a passion for literature, and you think of it as an epistemic tool, or as something that you learn from, that you learn
Mm,
about the world from these stories. And I mean, except that you do it more self-consciously. Everybody does it,
right, right.
but readers of literature in a self-conscious way.
Mm,
And so I went looking for. I mean, I grew up reading contemporary Tamil literature quite
mm,
seriously,
mm.
Jayakant and many others.
Wow.
And then I went to IIT. And of course, in school, you also end up reading, Dickens Shakespeare, at least the
Yeah.
average version or whatever. So you do develop, I think that in our time we read even Ian Fleming, the Bond novels are very famous.
Yeah, of
And
course.
yeah, so if you're a reader, then you read everything. Right? So, so then I went to IIT and I told myself that I'm not going to lose touch with my mother tongue. So I kept it up. It's fairly easy to do it. Fairly easy to kind of give it up, but I did.
Yeah, it is, really is.
It takes some kind of special effort, I guess. And also, I was like most kids, I guess. Uh, I had aspirations for writing, so I wrote some fiction before I graduated. Got it published also, but I decided not to write fiction.
Okay.
For some reason. I mean, I felt that it was not my thing.
Okay.
I was more interested in understanding. I was a student. I was a STEM student, so I always had this imposter syndrome. Simply because I can string words together, do I really know what I'm doing? That kind of
Don't we all? Don't we all?
and there was nobody to tell me it's all right.
Right.
So I stopped writing fiction, but I I try to learn as much as I could about literature and literary criticism, and how to read a book. This is something that students of literature do on their own, but I was a tech guy, so it was exciting for me. And
I love that. I love that.
Yeah. So no, the upshot is that that I grew up reading in two languages and responding to both. Quite intensely.
Yeah, and there's a way
So that went on.
Yeah, and there's also a way your brain sort of translates and transliterates
Yeah.
when we are communicating with different people too. Yeah.
So you live in both worlds together. I mean, at that time it was quite difficult.
Yeah.
Because you found yourself in milieux where nobody knew your other life. That kind of thing.
Yeah. Wow, beautiful.
Yeah, because if you're in a professional environment, everybody tends to talk in English and so on.
Yeah.
But yeah, so in a way, I started writing book reviews as a way of engaging more seriously and essays with literature. Since I didn't do creative writing myself, so I thought that this might be a better way. So I did a lot of book reviews. To my surprise, they were accepted by many papers. Deccan Herald in Bangalore, the Hindu, and so on. So I had a sort of career, and I developed friendships with people who were going to be famous writers later on. So I had both in Tamil and in English. So I had a kind of literary conversation going with several people.
So you had a whole parallel life happening there when you had your whole day job with this with your STEM career. I love that. Talk a little bit about the colors of ego. Sorry, go on.
Yeah. So what happened was that there was this friend of mine. She was putting together an anthology of short stories and for this organization called Kata, and she had to pick 4 stories from each of the major languages, South Indian language. The book was called A Southern Harvest. So she was actually picking my brain on what about the various writers, contemporary writers who were writing in Tamil at that time. She wanted to find out my opinion about it. And then suddenly she said, why don't you translate one of these stories? Out of the blue.
Right.
So I said, okay. That was I was like 38 or 39 at that time. So that's how I got into translation. I did a story for that anthology called Southern Harvest, and then I was commissioned to translate a collection of stories by Ashok Mehta.
Okay. So, I
I
mean,
had known Ashoka Mitran earlier. I
mm-hmm.
mean, because he was, while as a student, I used to go and look him up and we used to talk. Uh, so I and Ashoka Mitran was somebody that not only I but my contemporaries in the Tamil milieu, we all read him very
Yeah,
intensely.
yeah.
So we were all deeply engaged with his work. So for me, uh, you know, translating his stories was something that seemed like an exciting idea. So
Hmm.
because there were stories that I had engaged with quite deeply. So
Mm, mm. So you've talked a lot about how much research goes into sort of translating, even if it's a one short story, sort of like to keep the narrative art, to keep the personality traits, to keep the originality of the language when you translate. So can you talk a little bit about starting with the Colors of Evil and then with Ashoka Mitran's work, how you developed that sort of precision and sort of like your rhythm of like from the beginning of the process to the end.
okay, it took me about 5 years to do that collection.
Mm.
It was.
Mm.
Of course, I did it in 2 or 2.5 years, and then it took another 2 years for the publisher to bring out the story because
Mm.
those days translation titles were few and far between,
Yeah, yeah,
not like they are today.
yeah.
So uh, I initially I think I concentrated simply on focus on producing a literary text. Uh, you know,
Mm.
from
Mm.
just transporting into another
Yeah,
language. I
yeah.
did, of course, instinctively you uh, the the way you translate, you try to you bring your sense of what the original was for you.
Yeah.
You have a certain
Mm.
response to the original,
Right, I
and then you
see.
try to reproduce it.
Mm.
This thing,
Mm.
but I did it instinctively, and I did it like I don't know, probably a novice, because I was also struggling with how to write sentences and how to get the rhythm and so on.
Mm. Mm.
And obviously, practice matters a lot, right?
Right,
I
right,
mean,
right.
more you practice, the more you get better at it.
Mm.
So, but but to my surprise, I think the first anthology itself was quite a success. It was widely read and it was taught in American universities and so on.
Mm. Mm.
So I thought that okay, I mean, I can do this thing. Because when you translate, I mean, like I'm sure that many others would share with you also. There is a tremendous amount of self doubt and
Mm.
uncertainty
Mm. Mm.
goes with it, and you have to sort of uh, overcome it in some
Mm.
way. Yeah.
Mm.
Now, one thing I wanted to say is that one of your questions was, uh, how difficult do you find translating?
Yeah,
Which means,
yeah.
which is another way of asking, what is involved in
Mm-hmm.
translating prose.
Right, right.
I would say, I mean, I don't really theorize about my process, but of course I read about the process, other people, and so I get some clarity of my own. I would say that any piece of prose, particularly prose fiction, it has certain qualities like it has certain markers or traits like tone, sense,
Mm.
sensibility, music,
Mm.
information, emotion, and
Mm.
rhythm. I mean, these are uh, the 7 or 8 qualities that it has, and you try to reproduce most of them in your translated text, and that is done by instinct. It's just like the creative writing process. But you know when it is wrong, when it's not fair, So you try to rewrite. Translation is a lot of
Mm.
revision. A lot of
Mm.
revision. Uh,
Mm. So how about
revision and
what?
shaping.
Mm. So what kind of conversations do you have with the writer? Because obviously self doubt, a large part of self doubt is making like wanting to sound exactly like the original, right? So what kind of conversations do you have with the authors, or if the if not for conversations, what kind of interactions do you have with the author to make sure that it's as authentic as possible?
Uh, I mean, it may be maybe a little, it may be unusual,
Mm,
but the author doesn't loom large over my
mm,
translation process.
mm.
Because from my point of view, the author has written a fantastic text in
Right,
this language. Okay,
right.
I mean, and I'm also translating it,
Mm,
and perhaps, I mean, the author does have things to contribute. In the sense that uh, just like any other reader, an author, if he happens to be a good reader, then they can tell you that this sounds off.
mm,
Okay,
mm.
uh, uh, but the author as a kind of authority figure over the translation is not something that
Got you,
uh,
got you. That's
yeah,
interesting.
yeah, it's
Interesting.
not. Yeah, yeah.
Mm,
But there are authors who are very. I mean, most authors are very helpful, and
mm, mm.
if you have, you do have doubts about the original in the sense that you don't know what a
Right,
particular
right, right, right.
word means,
Mm,
or you don't know what the tone of a certain expression
mm, mm,
is
mm,
meant to convey. You can ask them, and they let you know.
mm,
Yeah, that
mm,
that is fine. But I'm not. I mean, I don't look upon translation as a service rendered. It's an
mm.
autonomous process.
Wow.
It's
Mm.
it's something you. Yeah. So
Yeah,
that's
that's,
that's how it is.
I love
It's
that.
it's a
That's,
very delicate
mm.
equation to work with the translator, with the authors, because authors also they don't know what kind of equation they should have with the translator.
Right.
Because in some sense, they are the stars of the result.
Right, 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 right.
But at the same time, the result doesn't belong to them.
Them. Yeah. Wow.
In,
Beautiful.
in a
Yeah.
certain way. It doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily belong.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm. So,
So,
you've talked a bit
so
about.
there's always this
Mm,
confusion.
yeah, yeah. You've talked a bit about this. Especially the translation of poems of 40 Tamil women poets. You've talked a lot about the challenges of understanding their perspective, because as somebody who's not had the same experiences as you know uh, uh, the subject of the
Yeah.
poetry, could you talk a little bit about the kind of thought process you go through and the kind of research that goes into sort of understanding somebody completely different from you, their perspective?
Yeah, it just doesn't have to do just with women, but many characters or
Mm.
many milieux that you come across in the text that you have to translate. I mean, you have no first-hand experience of them,
Right, right.
uh, obviously don't, and therefore uh, you have to empathize, and you have to uh, imagine,
Mm.
imagine, and then empathize.
Mm.
Yeah? And but that's something that you bring to as a translator, you bring to the task, because
Mm.
you've been reading a lot,
Right, right.
You've been reading Othello saying, say besides that in Aleppo once. I mean, you're sort of primed for it,
Mm.
of being, you know, uh, of 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 letting lines and words come alive for you.
Mm. Yeah.
That's what you do as a literary reader, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and therefore it's but of course you need to know a lot about what lies outside the text.
Mm.
Obviously, but that is also something a literary reader brings, right? So in this women's anthology, the poetry anthology that you're talking about,
Mm.
20 of those poems are written by Sri Lankan women
Mm.
who were writing in the middle of a war,
Right.
and they were about the war, and therefore you should know about who's fighting whom, and under what
Right.
conditions, and
Mm.
what they're saying, and
Mm.
yeah, so
Yeah.
obviously that that matters.
Yeah, a lot of background research and sort of like putting yourself in that kind of
Yeah, yeah,
situation. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Um, Talk a little bit about Perumal Murugan's work, and like sort of your introduction to him, and what about his work particularly has made it challenging but also exciting for you, to dive into his world of writing. You've said in the past that he has this humane but unsentimental tone, particularly in Poonachi, and I'm excited to hear from you about how sort of his tone and his words, you've found a way to translate and like make it so much that much more accessible for people.
Um, well, Perumal Murugan, I came to him fairly late in the
Mm.
sense that I think the first story of his that I read, of course, I've heard of him, and I was also aware that uh, you know the Seasons of the Palm
Mm.
had already appeared in English and so on. It appeared fairly early in the century, I think 2003 or four, and but I started reading him. I wasn't in Chennai or Tamil Nadu at that time. I was in, I think, Bombay.
Mm.
Uh, and uh, and I read in a magazine the story that I would translate later as the goat thief.
Mm.
Uh,
Mm.
I was completely haunted by that story uh, of of the loneliness of the goat thief. Right? I
Mm.
mean, he's there in that marsh, and
Yeah.
in the dark. He doesn't know where his next step would take him,
Mm.
and then you had and the night is over, and there's the sun, and the whole community which was after him, which is chasing him, they got tired of their sitting in judgment over him, and they are left, and
Mm.
and and they left him in this peril, you know
Right.
and he has to deal with it on his own. I mean, it
Mm.
was fantastic. And then I started reading it, and around 2012, I think, uh, this translation of uh, Madharupadan, which is as one part woman, it was
Yeah.
about to be published
Mm. Mm.
by this thing. I mean, I learned of it from some people, and I thought that I want to write about Ron Morgan's work,
Okay.
in an essay. So I spoke to Anjum Hassan, who was the books editor of Caravan, and then she bought the idea, and then I did it, and for that I read his entire move, or the novels up to then,
Yeah. Yeah.
in a period of 3 months, and then I went to Namakal and met him. So the essay was published in December 2013, and it
Mm.
was, yeah, it kind of, it was also helped me to understand his work in some way.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
What is there to see in,
Yeah.
that kind of
Yeah.
thing. So it was quite an intense experience, and
Mm.
I came to appreciate many things about his work. And one of it was that he wrote about the world he came from, and he wrote about it uh, uh, as somebody who spoke for the underdog,
Mm.
which
Mm.
which appealed to me very much,
Yeah.
and it didn't surprise me that he had a leftish background in his youth.
Mm.
Um, uh, so so I wrote the thing, and that was it, and then this whole thing went on. The controversy broke 2014 or 15, I think. And of course, it was terrible. And
Yeah.
then suddenly and during that period, of course, there were, because people were very curious about it, and so on. After One Part Woman,
Mm.
other people came forward to publish it in translation. And So I was there was this proposal with the with Juggernaut Books to bring out a collection of his short stories,
Got it.
and I didn't know about it. And then they thought that since I had done this essay, I mean, I was they could ask me to do, it. And I said fine, and that's how the Goat Thief collection came about. Which I enjoyed very much. Those stories are amazing. Uh,
Yeah,
about 10 of them.
yeah. He has a way of like talking about the very a textured way of talking about society and like what he sees and like the trees and the plants, like everything around him is so like it comes to
Yeah,
life so
yeah.
beautifully with the words. Could you talk a little bit about the challenges of translating something that's so viscerally textural? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it comes from how well you understand the kind of those kinds of stories. I mean, this is one of the things I talk about in my essay. What's a striking feature of his work in those. I mean, I think that he's sort of changed tack now, which we will talk about later. One of the striking features is that in his work, in his novels, early novels, uh, nature is not apart from people. I mean, the people don't have, like we urban creatures, we live in our heads, and
Right.
there is this thing. But for them, nature is also about survival. When they look up at the sky and say it looks like rain, they are worrying about the standing crop in the field, or
Right.
they are worrying about taking the goats into the pen or whatever. So it's not like they have a very detached.
Right.
It's not like they can say, "Oh, I won't go to that show this evening. I'll stay home." And,
Yeah.
I mean that's what we do. So there is I mean, this is only one dimension, but when you read his novels, you find that the natural world and the world of people are completely intertwined,
Right.
and it's kind of fascinating. Yeah,
Mm.
even when somebody is feeling distress or grieving, for instance,
Right.
they go to a in a rocky terrain. They go to they hide under some cleft. That happens very often. I mean, his
Right.
characters go,
Yeah.
they go and hide in
Yeah.
some place where nobody can find them.
Right.
I mean, that kind of thing. So if you're used to it, if you can see this and you have a feel for it, then you can translate it. I mean,
Yeah.
so it's
That's
so
beautiful. Um.
that's really how it is. And in the goat thief stories, I found particularly, of course, which he explains later in his introduction, because his introduction wasn't written until everything was completed. So, but the thing is that he writes about people who are kind of off, who are not normal, who are not uh, who deviate from the norm in some way, who are it's like there is a girl from a village who has to live in an apartment block in the city, and every day after, if she lived in the village, she would have the leftovers every day. She would have fed it to the cows, or she would have found a goat to to feed it to. But in the city, because she can't do it, she tries. She has to put it in the toilet bowl, and that traumatizes her. I mean, nobody likes to put. I mean, they have a certain feeling for food, and you don't do that, and the kind of trauma it creates in her. One story was about that. So, it's this. I mean, the stories in Goat Thief are all about such people who are stranded somewhere. Where their own nature is insupportable.
Right,
You
right,
know,
right.
you're not
They
supposed to.
feel
So
out of
it's a
sync with
fantastic
themselves because they
record.
feel
Yeah,
out of sync with
yeah,
the
yeah,
nature.
yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah. Uh,
Beautiful.
and
So what about
and so how they cope with it,
mm,
or what happens to them. Yeah.
beautiful. There's a lot with Perumal Murugan stuff that you've talked about, and it looks like you love his work personally, like as a reader itself. Could you like
Yeah.
what is the most exciting part of translating his work? And then after that, could you talk more broadly about just like the most exciting part of translating itself?
Okay, I've only done. I've read lot of
Mm,
his work,
mm.
but I've only done one story collection, and of course Poonachi.
Poonachi, yeah.
Poonachi, what happened was that
Mm,
there was, the publisher wanted to send a proposal to for publication of Poonachi, because
mm,
Poonachi, I think, it was politically very important. No, I mean,
mm.
even in Tamil
Right.
at time, and it was the first work that he did you know, after giving up writing. So, so Poonachi, I and when they had to send the proposal, and so they asked me to uh, do a couple of chapters, so
Right.
that they could send it around to various
Mm,
publishers and they could bid on projects and so on.
mm.
So, and the publisher who won the bid, who made the winning bid, they got in touch with me
Mm,
and said that, oh, we read your sample chapter, and will you please do it for us? And I said, okay, yeah. It had to be done in a massive hurry
mm.
because we want to bring it out as soon as possible, and it was done. So I did it in about 3-4 months. So it was great. That's how I ended up doing Poonachi. Yeah.
Mm. So talking about like one of the like the most exciting part of like translating Perumal Murugan's work, what would you say that is?
Uh, I would say that it's basically conveying his compassion towards his
Mm,
characters, and doing it in a very sort of understated way. I mean,
mm.
it's
Yeah,
and of course the all the special features of his this thing, like this intertwining with nature, uh, the portrayal of a whole different way of life in some
mm.
sense, which include animals and
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Well, animals being
So
central
it was
characters.
yeah. And one more thing is that in Perumal Murugan's prose, the he could write about a very tragic scene, but the tragedy won't jump at it. You have to
Subtle. Yeah.
reach into the text,
Mm.
and so as a translator, I had to do the same. And it was, so one had to be very careful. For instance, in the final section of Poonachi,
Mm.
where things are like impossibly bleak. I mean,
Right.
I think that most people find that section completely heartbreaking.
Mm.
From the time the famine, and they have to slaughter
Yeah.
goats
Yeah.
and dry the meat on rocks and stuff like that. And so the inevitable happens, and Poonachi is pregnant, and that that particular scene, it was very difficult in some way to it difficult, just as difficult to translate as it is to read in some way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one has to be careful because uh, you have to reproduce the same aesthetic that Perumal Murugan had in the original,
Mm.
which is not to shout about it,
Yeah. Yeah. Not to shout about it.
to
Good way.
just
Good way to put it.
to let the reader come to whatever is
Mm.
there.
Yeah.
So that is something
Do you sit?
I try to do.
This is a personally this is coming from a curious place personally. Do you sit with each of the chapters and sort of the tone of the chapter, especially you're talking about grief in the final portion of Poonachi, right? Like, do you sit with it? Do you feel it? Like, how long does it take for you to like emotionally be ready to translate something that's so grief-ridden and so heartbreaking?
I don't know. Actually, when you don't allow yourself to feel the grief or anything like that.
Interesting.
Yeah, you read it and you kind of the thing, and then you do it in a fairly detached way. You
Really?
don't.
Okay.
I mean, you're not affected by. I mean, you. Yeah, I don't think so. You construct the text and then you. Yeah, it's a very. Yeah, you can't translate otherwise.
Right. Wow. Fascinating. Well, I don't know. Like I
No,
feel.
because you. I mean, this is something that you actually go inside the text
Right.
and
Right.
you and you know what Benjamin calls a language beyond language.
Yeah.
So you access that and then
Mm.
you express it in English or
Mm.
express it in the
Mm.
um, target language.
Wow.
So when
Fascinating.
you are there in the language beyond languages, you don't really you're not apart from it. So you don't
Mm. Wow.
you you don't allow yourself to feel.
Beautifully put. Interesting, interesting. That segues into my next question about lost in translation, right? That's a phrase that's like, everybody talks about it. Like, sometimes I feel it too because when I translate something that I'm feeling in Tamil, in English, like it doesn't land the same way. Could you talk about just sort of finding in translation, like what that is, that thread that you find, and make sure that it's not lost in translation in like broader sense? It doesn't have to be just Perumal Murugan's work because you also have done so much more.
Yeah, but I mean, I used to sort of jokingly say that every time I hear lost in translation, I want to reach for my gun.
Oh boy.
I don't think that, I don't think it's a very meaningful way uh, of dealing with the translation process. Somebody asked both of us, Perumal Murugan and I, about, things being lost in translation. And Perumal Murugan said that when I sit down to write my story, uh, I don't I don't get to write everything that I thought of. There is something lost there. So there is always a loss involved in writing
Mm,
anything. So it's not a big deal. But the real thing is
interesting.
that you know uh, translation is, of course, it's writing a given text in another language, right?
Mm,
Writing a literary text in another language. Now the thing is that text, the translation, is related to the original, but so it is different. It is not greater or lesser than the
mm,
original. That's the way to look at it. Because if you're going to read the translation, then you're going to respond to it as a literary text. And most people who read the translation have
mm.
no access to the original.
Got it, got it,
So
got it.
why this the translation
Mm,
on the basis of benchmark that you
mm.
have no idea of, and
Yeah.
and another
Fascinating.
thing and another thing is that uh, each language uh, is situated also in a culture, in a community, right? uh, okay, English is different, but
Right.
English among Indians has a certain community, right?
Correct.
So what I mean to say is that when you're translating from one a text from one language to another,
Mm,
I mean, there is bound to be modification.
mm-hmm.
Whether the modification takes away from what is original or whether it adds to it, it's not something. It can quite easily be the case that uh, that that an English translation can be crisper and more lucid
Mm,
than
mm.
uh, than the thing, because the literary culture is different. The literary culture in Tamil is not always oriented toward brevity and
That's true. That's true.
understatement and all that. I mean, many Indian languages like that.
More
So when you
flowery.
translate into English, obviously you wouldn't want to be, you
Mm.
wouldn't want to do that.
Right, right,
You
right.
would want to sort of,
Mm.
you would want to translate it with a tone that won't put off the reader in English.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That is not strange. Yeah.
Yeah, that is,
So
yeah,
you
yeah.
do this, you do
Mm.
this alchemy or whatever. This is a decision that the translator makes.
Mm.
So and to say that you lost in translation, I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
Right.
So just, I mean, yeah. So I mean, I would even say it's a form of Philistinism. It's, but it's just relate to the literary text, and if it's any good, it will show, and if it's not good, it will also show. So
Yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
learn to encounter or respond to a translated text in its own terms.
Yeah. Okay, that's great advice. I like that a lot. I should take that advice too, because sometimes I'm constantly compare. I mean, as human beings, I think we constantly compare. I think that's the crux of it all, is that the need to compare. And I love the idea of just like taking it as its own text and like not having to compare it with something else, because you don't know what you're comparing it to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, if I may say so, I mean, when we read Dostoevsky in English,
Mm. Yeah.
or Italo Calvino in English, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we don't do that, right?
Yeah,
I
that's
mean, you
true.
don't think
That's
of,
true.
yeah.
That's true.
So
Mm.
it just requires a certain humility
Yeah.
to do it when you when you have some idea of the language.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. So you've done this for a long time now. If you had to pick one piece of work that, stands out for any reason, or like that really excited you, like what would that pick be and why?
Uh, yeah, I've answered this question a time. Uh, yeah, one is this novel called Manasarovar,
Mm,
which was published by Penguin in 2010.
mm,
It by Ashoka Mitran, and it's a novel that talks about the friendship between two people. One of them is an actor
mm.
from Bombay film industry who comes to Madras to act in a film, act in several films, in fact, for a studio. And there is a screenwriter in the studio, and
Mm.
both of them men, of course, and they develop a relationship, and terrible things happen to them, and and it typically, the transgressive behavior in a film industry and so on. It's all, it's a great literary achievement by Ashok, and
Mm.
it takes place uh, in the early 60s.
Got it, got
Early
it.
60s in Chennai.
Chennai,
So,
okay.
so it was also like, it was also, I was a kid at that time. So, I mean,
Mm.
it had a personal meaning for me. So,
Mm. Mm. Beautiful, beautiful. Um,
and I think that, the novel is narrated alternately between, the actor and the screenwriter.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and, uh, uh, and I had to reproduce those voices. I mean, that's very challenging. Yeah.
Mm. Mm.
The actor is a person who's come to Bombay from Peshawar. I mean, it's loosely based on Dilip Kumar, actually,
Mm.
the
Mm.
actor's character.
Oh, cool. Very cool. I have to check it out for sure.
Yeah, yeah,
Could you
yeah.
talk to a more broader moment that translation is having in sort of like the South Indian and Indian literary scene? And could you talk a little bit more from personal experience, but also being in the industry for so long, that, what is it about this moment that is translation having a bit of a moment right now? Or like, where do you see sort of like in the larger scheme of things, where translation stands?
Um, I don't know, because if you've been doing it for a long time, you don't. I mean, I would say this, that in the beginning, uh, translators translations actually didn't. I mean, they were not respected. because this translation boom coincided with also the boom in Indian writing in English, and translators are also always considered our grip on English and our ability to write. It was always considered suspect in some way. So I mean, it was very, very difficult to get a response to your work. You know, and even the publishers, for them, translation was only a marginal appendage to this thing.
Right.
So what I would say is that over these 30 years, through really hard work by the community of translators, it's translation has forced its way into public attention. For one thing, it's kind of clear to me that, and it's clear to a lot of people now, that that the works that are written in Indian languages, they are far stronger in some way, and they are more diverse. They represent a far more diverse communities than writing in English does. Indian writing in English. I mean, this is something that I mean, it's a kind of generalization, but I think it's probably true, because it's, the Indian the writing in Bhasha, the Bhasha literature doesn't confine itself to urban settings and so on, and it doesn't confine itself to a certain class of people, or classes of people. So it's it's far more in scope. It's far more vast, and the sensibility that these writers bring to their work is more. I don't know. It's closer to life, closer to the life of the people. So I mean, yeah, this is. I mean, I'm just because I have to say it in a few lines, saying this. But yeah, but I guess that we could speak more thoughtfully about it. But the thing is that initially, such a body of literature, when it was translated, it didn't get the kind of attention it deserved. But now it's beginning.
It's beginning to.
Yeah.
Where do you see it sort of
it's
going?
a good thing, yeah.
Yeah. Where do you see it sort of? Is it picking up and like it's gonna go to a great place, or like do you see it sort of like having its is it more of a slow sort of pick up, or is it more like okay, like everybody's now reading Perumal Murugan? It's like he's and through you, like you've made it so much more accessible. So could you talk a little bit about that, sort of like the next, what's coming next for translation, particularly in the Indian and South Indian diaspora?
For the movement in translation,
yeah,
I think that there will be more translation, and because I would like to talk a little bit about where do translators come from.
Right, sure.
Usually, translation is done into the mother tongue of the translator. People translate into their first language.
Right.
But obviously English translators in India don't do that. Right? I mean, they may call English their first language, but they don't live in a native English speaking environment. Definitely not. So we are what is called the L2 translators. So it gives us an advantage in the sense that we can sort of enter the culture of what we are translating, culture of the source text, far more easily than somebody who's teaching South Asian languages in Berkeley, right? Which used to be the
Got it. Mm.
the usual translation. So it's a so since we come from, since we are not confined to uh, that kind of academic background or something,
Mm.
so we can come from anywhere. We
Right.
can come. We can. I used to work in ISRO, and there is I know a translator in Tamil who is sort of working for a pharma company in Geneva, or
Mm.
they can come from practically any walk of life,
Yeah.
and they do also.
Mm. Mm.
So increasingly they're also coming from abroad. In Malayalam and so on, the translators who have made a splash, who have, they live abroad.
Mm.
Uh, but that doesn't mean that we can't have homegrown
Yeah.
translators.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to say is that the the sources of translators has diversified now,
Mm.
and
Mm. Who gets to translate?
they bring their own sensibility, their
Mm.
own knowledge of politics, of
Yeah.
society, of language to the translation process. So I feel that, and now of course there are courses being conducted.
Mm.
People are being
Mm.
trained, like like Aruna Vasena is teaching translation in
Yeah. Mm. Mm.
National University and so on. And maybe, I mean, it will be great if people, if such courses are available all over the country.
Mm.
Uh,
How
so I
how
feel that
how important is it for the translator to be ingrained in that culture, to write about that culture? Because you talked about, foreign people that live abroad. So could you talk a little bit more about sort of like the nuance of that?
I think that you don't have to be born to that culture, but you certainly have to spend a lot of time.
Mm,
Yeah,
mm,
and for instance, you take somebody like George Hart, Professor George Hart, who's translated Sangam poem. I
yeah.
mean, he took, he even married a Indian,
Mm,
married a Tamil.
mm,
So you have to uh, spend a lot of time with it,
yeah.
like an academic word or somebody like that. If you're not born to the culture, if you're born to it, of course, it's different. I mean, it depends on how much you invest in it.
Mm,
So.
mm. I have one last question for you because I don't want to keep you for too long. But is there a dream piece of work that you would like to translate that, out of personal curiosity, I'd love to know of this, like something that you've been thinking about, or like something that it doesn't even have to be a particular work, but a theme or like a challenging aspect of translating that you haven't yet tried, but you would love to in the future?
Uh, there are several. I mean, uh, I would like to actually. There was this playwright called Muthuswami,
Hmm.
who's a great exponent of modernist theater in Tamil, and I believe he's something of genius.
Mm.
He was. He passed away a couple of years ago. Uh, I would like to have make an attempt at translating his plays.
Mm. I love
Uh,
that.
I mean, yeah, that's one thing. There is also a poet, a woman poet who's writing uh, a very cutting edge anti poetry kind of.
Mm.
Uh,
What is
so
her name?
uh, Perundevi,
Perundevi. Okay.
Perundevi, yeah,
Mm.
yeah, yeah. And yeah, I published some of her work in Scroll. I think this. She wrote some poems on the pandemic.
Wow, really cool. Okay.
Related to pandemic. Yeah, yeah.
Wow. Fantastic.
So stuff like that. There is also this writer called Pudhumaipithan, who is he died shortly after independence, and he's celebrated as the father of modern Tamil modernist literature.
Mm.
And he was a brilliant short story writer. Yeah, I would
Yeah.
like to do a volume of his short stories sometime.
Wow. Well, great things to look forward to from you then.
Yeah, I mean, for a translator, of course, it's an embarrassment of riches. I mean, it's in any language, I guess. It's not any Indian language.
Right. Well, thank you so much for your time. I had such a great time getting to know you better. Thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, you're welcome. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.
I hope, yeah.
No, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. All right.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
Then.
Bye.
See you.